Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 30. Today I want to talk about the concept of belief work and why it can be a little extra tricky for creatives like us. So I will start by defining what I mean by belief work, since it can be used in a lot of different contexts and different ways. So when I'm talking about belief work, I'm talking about the idea that in order to achieve something, you have to deeply believe that it is possible at like a minimum. And ideally, you'll eventually get to this place where you believe that achieving your goal is inevitable, that it is definitely going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Before I get into sort of my main point of today, which is how to tell if you actually believe or if you just have a very beautiful, detailed fantasy of your goal, I want to explain how brief work actually functions. And it's not that we just cocoon ourselves in blankets on the couch and believe really hard and then a book deal falls out of the sky. That is not how it works. It actually comes back to the model. And again, go back to the previous episode where I teach this. And in the model, we learn that the thoughts we believe create an emotion in our body, and that emotion drives the actions that we take, which then create our results in the world. So if we take me as an example, from the time I started writing in 2012 until the time I got my first book deal in 2017, I was taking all sorts of actions toward achieving that goal. I wrote 5 novels during that time. I read a bunch of articles and, different things about the craft of writing, listened to podcasts about writing, learned how to query, got lots of feedback, gave lots of feedback. And most importantly, even with all of the rejections coming in, I was always writing a new book so I would have something new to query. The reason I was able to do all of those things over the course of all of those years was because I believed that it was possible for me to be a traditionally published author. And that belief went through stages. Early on, I believed that it might be possible, and then that it was definitely possible, and then probable. And eventually, as I got further down this path, I started to believe that if I kept going, it was inevitable that I would be a traditionally published author. Now, I want to go ahead and pause, and we're going to remind ourselves that perfectionism is not welcome in this space. This is not about being in perfect belief 100% of the time. It's not thinking that if you have a moment of doubt or insecurity or worry that you're going to ruin the universal vibes and prevent you from getting what you want. That is not how this works. We're also not going to gaslight ourselves into never being disappointed, when we have things that we want to be disappointed about. If we have a setback or we get a particular rejection from maybe an agent we thought would have been a really good fit, it's okay to be disappointed about those things. It is okay and inevitable that we're going to have the entire human experience, the full range of human emotions. You are not doomed because you have doubts. We all do at certain times. And for the writers that I know, a lot of us have doubts a lot of the time. We tend to be an anxious, worried bunch overall, and that's okay. One thing we do want to watch out for is when we mistake just having this beautiful technicolor fantasy of our goal with actual belief that we can make it happen. Because it is that belief that drives us to take the actions we need in order to succeed. So how do we do this? I'm going to show you. So if you're not driving, if it's safe to do so, go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you to think about the writing goal that you are trying to achieve. Perhaps you're trying to finish a novel for the first time. Maybe your current dream is signing with a literary agent, or maybe it's seeing your book for sale online, or walking into your favorite bookstore and seeing your novel prominently displayed on the shelves. Whatever that thing is, I want you to hold on to it for a moment. You don't have to know how you'll make it happen. You don't need to know every single step. The how can be totally fuzzy, but can you picture yourself having achieved that thing? Imagine how it feels. Do you see yourself on the other side celebrating the success, having achieved your dream? Right? You got that like image in your brain, or if you're like me and you don't have images in your brain, that sort of like that feeling, that knowing, that certainty. Okay, so this is where it gets tricky for writers because a huge part of what we do is create made up people who end up feeling totally alive inside our brains. We have characters who take on a life of their own and sort of become something more than we even ever anticipated. For my fellow fantasy writers or science fiction or historical, we create whole new worlds for some of our books. Just create it and it exists in our brain and then we make it real. This is what we're good at. So whether we can see it playing out of in our heads, or again, if you don't have that mind's eye, because like I definitely don't have that, we sort of like can feel it very vividly. Just because we have that fantasy all fleshed out, doesn't mean we actually believe that we can make it happen. And the only way to diagnose belief is to look at the actions you're taking or not taking. So follow with me. Let's say your goal is to sign with an agent. So you can see yourself getting the email saying how much they loved your book. You imagine the excitement and the nerves of talking to them on the phone or over Zoom or however it's happening these days. It feels real to you as you imagine it. But to test if you do believe it, I want you to look at what you've done over the last day, week, or month. Are you actually taking steps to write or revise a book? Have you scheduled time to do agent research? Are you taking any active steps toward improving your writing or storytelling skills? If you're not taking any action towards your goal, there's a good chance you don't believe it's possible for you. It's fun to think about. It's a nice little fantasy that you can escape to, but you don't believe it. And if you don't believe it, you're not going to achieve it. But finding out that you don't believe in your goal isn't a reason to panic. So take a deep breath. Everything's okay. Becoming aware of the lack of belief is actually the first most vital step towards building belief. Because now you have a chance to ask yourself some really good exploratory questions. Ask yourself things like, why don't I believe I can do this? What do I think is standing in my way? What do I think it takes to achieve that goal? And why haven't I been willing to do those things? And as you answer those types of questions, you give yourself an opening to find the thoughts that are keeping you in inaction. So you might find answers like, people like me don't make it in publishing. I don't have enough time to write a novel. The agent process is too confusing. I don't even know where to start. If I only have 20 minutes a day, it's not even worth it. I'm too new. I don't have enough skills. I'm afraid that people will be upset by the work that I want to write, on and on. You sort of find all those thoughts. And the goal is not to judge them. It's simply to find them. And it's really important. Sometimes folks make the mistake of thinking that they don't want to give more energy or airtime to these thoughts, so they don't want to look at them. But they're already in your brain. They're already operating. They're already running models and creating results in your life. By you looking at them and shining a light on them, you now have the power to dismantle them. So sometimes, again, people are like, oh, I don't want to look at it. I don't want to give energy to the negative things. It's already there. Just because you're not looking at it doesn't mean it's not there. It's like all the shit you shove in your closet and like hope that it goes away. It's still there. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's gone. Once you have those things, you get to start to question them to see if they're true. Some of them are going to be flat out false, and some are going to have a kernel of truth. But just because something is true doesn't mean it's worth thinking about over and over. So we're going to debunk some of these thoughts. So a common one is, I don't have enough time to write a novel. There are a lot of assumptions hidden in that sentence. So we start to pick it apart. How much time do you think you need? And is that amount of time accurate? Are there things you're telling yourself where you have to write every single day? And since you can't do that, that means you can't be a writer. That shit's false. What if it was okay to only write for a few minutes a day or to only write on weekends? If you truly believed that you could achieve your goal, could you be okay with the fact that it might take you 2 years instead of 1 or maybe 4 years? I also love to poke holes in the thoughts, I'm too new or like I don't have enough skills. And I think these are so funny because in a lot of ways, they're true. Of course you're new, and you're most likely right. You probably don't have enough skills right now. That is not a problem. You gain the skills by actually sitting down to write. You can't become a good writer just by reading craft books. You actually have to do the thing. And the more you do the thing, the less new you become and the better you get. So thinking that I'm too new, I don't have the skills, I always laugh at those, not in a mean way because they feel very real and like defeating to the person, but like, yeah, you are new. You do probably suck at writing. It's not a problem. We all suck at it at first. Like that's literally how we all start. My first novel I wrote was a trash fire, just mess. Huge mess. And that's fine. Where you are now with your writing skill has zero bearing on how good and amazing you're going to get. Don't let that stop you. All right, some of you might have the opposite concern, and it's less that you're new and more that you're like, well, I've been at this a long time. I should have been able to get good enough by now. So sometimes folks will say things like, well, I've been writing for 3 years and I have nothing to show for it. And I love to sort of dig in and question this. Like, have you really been writing for 3 years? Or have you been thinking about writing for 3 years and then every now and then you spend a few months like trying to actually do the writing? Or if you have been writing all of that time, what's been the model driving that work? Are you writing with this really rushed, frenetic energy because you're afraid time is running out? And if you don't publish by the time you're 25, your life is over? Spoiler, it's not how that works. There is no age limit to publishing. Do you race through your first drafts and then just run it through spell check and send it off? Or do you actually give yourself ample time to get feedback and do the deep, intensive revisions that break the story apart so you can put it back together stronger than before, while knowing and believing that it's inevitable that if you keep doing this, eventually you will get there? So it's important that you get really specific with yourself when you're telling yourself these stories about why you can't do something or why you haven't done it, and just try to pull apart what is actually a true fact of the world and what is just your interpretation of those facts. What is the story you tell yourself? And if you can set down any judgments or opinions and justifications, and if you just look at the unaltered truth of what's been going on, that awareness will so often help you shift out of old habits and then actually believe something new. So we'll bring it back to our example of wanting to sign with an agent. You've been telling yourself that you believe you can, but your actions say otherwise. So we now know it was just a beautiful fantasy in your head. It wasn't actually belief. And you've asked yourself some questions and you figured out some of the thoughts that have kept you stuck. For this example, we'll just do the time you have available and the skills that you currently have. So we know that. Now what? The answer, my friends, is not to just force yourself into taking action. That rarely works for more than a day or two. Because remember, our thoughts create our feelings and our feelings drive our actions. If we try to just jump right to the actions, it's not sustainable. So what I do with my clients is I have them start to shift their thoughts. And if you remember from last week in the thought ladder, we don't go from I have no time to I have all the time in the world. We don't do that bullshit. We want to just wiggle our way into something better. So if time is a big concern, and oftentimes I'll see folks who have very all or nothing kind of views of like, well, if I can't write for an hour or 2 hours, then I shouldn't bother at all. We start to test out thoughts like, could maybe 20 minutes be enough for today? Or 15 minutes is better than 0. We just play with a little bit of what is a possible thing that we could believe that get us into action. Because think about it. If you believe if you can't write for an hour, it's not worth it, you're very unlikely to consistently write in 20-minute spurts. Very unlikely to happen. But if you can start to believe every 20 minutes matters, or 5 minutes is better than none, if we can start to believe those things, you'll actually start to do the thing of writing. And I often will recommend folks put sticky notes by their computer, make it the background of your phone, to remind yourself to practice this new thought. Shifting from an old belief into a new one does not happen overnight. You will have to practice it over and over and over until it becomes more automatic. And so we'll try a different one. So let's say your main issue is the belief that the process is really overwhelming. I will help my clients test out different thoughts like, you know what, right now, all that matters is writing this scene. Or I can worry about learning to write a query letter after I get this book really solid. We'll test out different thoughts until we find one that they believe. And you know if you believe a thought based on whether you feel it in your body as a new emotion. So if you say it and then you start to feel willing or committed or curious, that's a thought that you believe, and you'll put that on repeat. And then we just test and adjust. Did that thought help you get into action this week? What can we tweak to make it a little bit easier for this next week? And it's an iterative process. It's one that you can totally do on your own using the thought ladder technique like I talked about last week. It is, of course, much easier and more effective with a coach who can really help you see all of the places where you're believing shit that doesn't help you, and help you separate out the facts from the stories, and help you not try to like jump to the top of your thought ladder and all of those different things. Now, with all that said, you don't have to give up on your beautiful fantasy. You don't have to stop daydreaming about that first offer. I will certainly never tell anybody to stop daydreaming. I do it all of the time. You just want to also keep an eye on your A-line, your actions, to see if you truly believe in your goals. All right, to wrap things up, I want to remind you again that you do not have to be in perfect belief 100% of the time. I've said before, and I will say it again forever and ever, perfectionism is a tool of the white supremacist patriarchy, and we get to reject that shit. Perfection does not ever, ever, ever have to be a goal. We don't have to have a perfect, unbroken streak of writing days in order to think that we're good enough. You are good enough because you are a human being, and your writing will get good enough for publication if you just keep at it. All you need to do is take one little step at a time. All right, friends. Until next week, happy writing. Ready to break up with burnout? I can show you how. With my unique blend of book and life coaching, I help writers craft stories they love, all without the imposter syndrome and perfectionism that gets in the way. Go to isabelsterling.com/coaching to learn more and schedule your free consultation. Until next week, happy writing.